Today we are very, very thrilled to welcome Kerry James Marshall and Sarah Thornton, best-selling author, on the stage today for this conversation. It's presented in partnership with the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago on the occasion of Kerry James's retrospective closing this weekend. We hope you've all had a chance to attend. Please join us in welcoming our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Is this working? Can everyone hear me? Super. We really must change the lights. I'm sorry. Can we just have it like this over here? We'll be developing a migraine soon. Just like the lighting over here would be great. Perfect. Yeah. And look at this crowd.
Oh, they're people.
Fantastic. Really terrific. Well, I assume everyone has seen Kerry's absolutely amazing show at MCA Chicago, which closes today. Oh, it closes tomorrow. Closes tomorrow. So if you haven't seen it, you gotta see it because you'll want to see it everywhere it goes. You want to see the Chicago version, the New York version, the LA version, and hopefully we'll continue traveling from there. I must say, okay, there we go. Thank you. I'm always happy to have advice. I don't think I've seen a show that is so impactful in so many different ways. Art historically, aesthetically and formally, socially and politically, and emotionally. It's such an emotionally engaging show, full of love, triumphing over fear and anger. And it's deeply, it's just an amazing representation of humanity. But let's dive into the questions. So, now artists tell me that a major museum retrospective is a time of reckoning. And, it can be odd to see all these works together. Some of them you might not have seen in the flesh for 30 years. And so, it's kind of like pulling them out of the diaspora and reuniting an extended family. In viewing your show at MCA Chicago, what have you learned about your work?
Ooh. Oh. Well, you know what? It's not so much that I learned anything about my own work, having seen it kind of gathered together like this. But I think what I experienced when I saw this much of the work assembled in one place. I honestly, I experienced a sense of satisfaction.
Woohoo!
And that has a lot to do with a certain kind of lingering anxiety that hovers over what you do, especially when you're doing a thing that requires you to be so close to it in order to get it done. And so you make a lot of things and you send them out and you hear what people say about them, but the things people say about what you do don't really register so much because you can't quite trust that people are always saying what they mean when they tell you things. Because there are a lot of reasons why people speak favorably to you in your face, So you work with a lot of uncertainty and with a certain kind of self-doubt about whether you've actually achieved the things that you set out to achieve. So that's just I think that's just a part of what it means to be a maker, a person who makes things, and especially a person who makes things that nobody asked you to make. It's like nobody asks you to go in the studio and spend all your time making some pictures. Nobody asks you for that. And then nobody really needs them either. In the truest sense of the word, because they're not like toothbrushes. They're not like tennis shoes. They're not like things that people actually need to use in order to get their lives going on a day-to-day basis. And so in the places you come to see arts, I mean, you have to go outside of your normal kind of everyday preoccupations to come to a place to look at some pictures like this. And I mean, and there are a lot of people who don't make that effort because it just doesn't impact their lives all that much. And so this is the kind of environment you're working in as an artist. I mean, you make the stuff that you think you need to make in order to, on the one hand, to really help shape the conversation about other things that are kind of like it. So for people who are making paintings, I mean, you're really making paintings because you want to shape the conversation, you want to participate in, but you also want to help shape the conversation about what paintings should be like, or what paintings can do, or what they haven't done before that they ought to do. I mean, that's what you're really trying to do. You're trying to shape that conversation, and you try to make a thing that enters into the conversation in a way that allows people, and in some places compels people to take note of it. I mean, that's sort of really what it's kind of about.
Now, the retrospective has been pretty well universally critically acclaimed. And there's always a highly selective process that goes into choosing which works to include and exclude. This is a kind of cheeky question, but I can ask it on the penultimate day of the show.
Sarah.
What is missing from the story the retrospective tells?
Oh, what's missing? Well, I mean, it invariably is going to be an incomplete story because it purports to start at the beginning, but it doesn't. I mean, that painting that is the pivotal painting from 1980, well, that's already, well, so
Which is self-portrait.
Portrait of the artist as a shadow of his former self. But that was a kind of a transitional picture because it was for me a way of resetting my priorities. It became a kind of 0 degree for me, you know, where you sort of to start over again and to operate in the art world with more purpose, with more of a clarity about my purpose. And to really try and fulfill a kind of mission that I thought was worth being engaged in. So that work comes after a period when what I was doing before was a lot of stuff that you might describe, well, some stuff you would describe as abstract and mixed media collages, but also some stuff that you might describe as a kind of metaphysical, kind of semi-surreal, kind of use of imagery. In that case, in that way in which what you're always trying to do is be a little ambiguous because somebody told you that being specific about things was a bad idea or a bad approach. And so, but this is one of those preconceptions that circulate through art school and through the art world that somehow ambiguity is better than clarity. But I started to get a sense while I was making some of those mixed media collages and while I was doing some of those sort of mystical looking kinds of pictures that there was a little something missing, that it needed to be directed more, that it needed somehow to be more precise and a whole lot less ambiguous. And that painting I made, the portrait of the artist as a shadow of his former self, I mean, that was my way of sort of resetting what my priorities were going to be. So I made that picture. And when I made that picture, I was operating in a way that sought to eliminate, chance. To take chance out of the equation. And to operate in the work in a way. So I had been reading an article in the old arts magazine from way back, and there was a conversation with John Cage talking about Marcel Duchamp, and there was a moment in that conversation where the question of chance came up, and Cage says, "Well, I'm not interested in the same kind of chance that Duchamp is interested in." And the kind of chance Duchamp is deploying almost anything can happen, and that doesn't interest me at all. What I'm interested in is setting up a series of parameters in which the thing that I am looking for is more likely to happen than not. Because I'm looking for a specific thing. I don't want just anything. And so I started to adopt an approach to making my work that was sort of like that, where I'm not really interested in almost anything happening, and I'm certainly not interested in people looking at my work and thinking anything they want to think. And so what you really want is to make work that sets up a series of conditions and circumstances that give people a chance to engage with the intellect of the person that made the thing. That's what you really want. It's not a free-for-all when you come to the museum looking at stuff. It shouldn't be a free-for-all. Because to me, I mean, there's just not enough at stake when you're making work that sort of can be looked at any old kind of way. That's to your point.
I have about three different questions springing to mind, but I want to pick up on art education. You went to Otis, and you actually have an honorary doctorate from Otis. You've done some teaching over the years.
I did a lot of teaching.
And what's your feeling about the kind of dominant mode of art education in America?
Uh-oh. I got to get ready for this one.
You're amongst friends.
I don't know. This could be a mob rule situation. So I don't know. Okay, so here's the thing. Now it's important to keep this in context. So I was at Otis. I entered Otis in 1977, in January 1977. And so if in the art history that you're learning, you sort of know what that period was like. But I went to school thinking that school was a place you went to learn things. And that what learning happened as a part of a process in which you were challenged to demonstrate how well you understood, or how much you knew, or how able you were to implement a series of ideas, techniques, and or other strategies. That's what I thought school was supposed to be about. And I had looked forward to being in school because I thought it was really going to be hard. But by the time I got to Otis in 1977, a lot of that difficulty that was built into the structure of the art education had already been set aside. And for the most part, I mean, unless you were lucky enough to find a sort of single person that you can work with kind of on the side, who would sort of give you information and or challenge you. And I'm here in part because I met a person when I was at school who challenged me to put up or shut up, in a series of arguments we were having when I was telling him I was going to drop out of his class because he didn't know what he was talking about. But because of a lot of that experience, though, I decided I wasn't going to go to graduate school. That graduate school at the time seemed to me to be a kind of a fraud. And I left school angry, but determined to render the idea of a master's degree completely obsolete by doing all the things that a person who went to graduate school was supposed to be able to do, but to do it without having to have it. And so back then, it's like, well, the jobs that were available to artists, if you wanted to make your master's degree mean something, well, you could apply for jobs at universities. And you couldn't really apply for a job at a university without an MFA. So I started operating strategically to put myself in a position where I could teach without ever having to have a master's degree. And so, and then you used to be able to write proposals. I used to write proposals for classes to teach at LA City College and at LA Southwest College and at Santa Monica College. So you write a proposal for a class, and if you can get people to sign up, you can get that class. You can do that class. And so that's how I started teaching. And then subsequently, I was invited to be a teacher at LA Southwest College by another person who was the chairman of the department there. And so that's how I got I joined the AFTC, the union. I got my union card. I got a teaching job, and I was teaching at LA City College. And then I ran the art gallery on campus while I was there. So,
what's the worst thing that art students learn at art school? Because I know you know, or you have an opinion on that.
Is that anything you're doing matters? That's the worst thing you learn. You think everything you're doing matters when you're in school.
Let's touch on another sector of the art world. The catalog for Kerry's MCA Chicago retrospective and the touring retrospective has sold 1,800 copies, I heard, which is a phenomenal number for a expensive book, relatively speaking. And the reproductions, I mean, you got to buy it for the reproductions alone, whether you read the text or not. The colors are carefully and lusciously reproduced. And it does contain some interesting articles and things like that. And I know, Kerry, you're an avid reader. Your own catalog aside, what do you think about art criticism and art history today?
Well, I mean, you know what? I love art criticism. I love it, and I love the construction of art historical narratives, because that's, I mean, like if you're not reading that, if you're not in that conversation, then where are you? I mean, really. I mean, this is, how do you know how value is being assigned to things except to read how people construct value around the things that they privilege? I mean, that's the only way you're going to know. And then what you're looking for, really, in art history and in art criticism is how the consensus circulates around certain ideas and around certain people who embody those ideas. I mean, that's really what art history is, and that's the best thing that criticism can do. Because it's like, I mean, this activity is not a kind of completely solipsistic thing where it's like it's just you and you and you and you and how you feel about it. It's not. I mean, you're making things that you intend other people to look at. You intend other people to think about. You hope somebody has something to say about it that seems worthwhile or that kind of connects with something that you mean for them to understand. I mean, that's what criticism is. I mean, and if you read enough of it, you see that there's like a huge spectrum of approaches to a lot of different things. But underneath a lot of it, you'll find the place where there's general consensus that these things matter, and it's because of these reasons. And when you get to those reasons that most people agree on, that things seem to matter, that's where you start to organize your interest in the kind of work you do. I mean, you got to organize. You got to be trying to get to something, because what else is there?
What's the most wonderful or the most irritating thing someone's ever said about your work?
Well, I'll tell you. So the best piece of advice, the best piece of criticism I ever got was early on. I mean, so when I was like a young upstart, just out of school. So I was in a show in L.A. at the Municipal Art Gallery at Barnsdall Park. And this is when I was doing those mixed media things. And I relay this to students of mine all the time, because I think this is the kind of criticism you always want to get. And it should change you. So I had this work in the show, and here's the thing: so being invited to be in shows is a kind of endorsement of the value of what you're already doing. But that's because we'll get to the reason why that's so later on. But at any rate, so there was a show called Newcomers, 1979. It's like an emerging artist show, and it was reviewed in the LA Times. Suzanne Munchnick. She's not in the room with you. Somebody knows who she is, though. Anyway, so here's the criticism. So she liked the work. She said, there are these really nice mixed media collages, beautiful compositions, nice color, but they fade into masses of other things that are just like them. Now, if that's not a wake-up call, there's no help for you. I mean, so you could be upset about that. But when you read that kind of thing, you already know it. You know it before they say it. But if people keep encouraging you to keep doing those kinds of things, there are people who will give in to that and kind of go in that direction because it seems like the right way to go because it seems to be producing some success. But if this is really early in your development, don't pay attention to none of it. I mean, you gotta set a certain kind of objective. And my objective from the get-go, and the only reason I went to art school in the first place was because I wanted to have work at the LA County Art Museum. That's why I went to art school in the first place. And so I had to figure out, well, it's like if you go to the museum and you see work in there, why is that work in there and not something else? You got to be able to figure out a way to analyze that work and find out why that seems to be so. And some of the way you do that is to find out what art historians who are writing about it keep saying. And if they keep saying the same thing, then there must be something there. But if somebody contradicts it, then you got to start comparing why that contradiction doesn't match with the other thing you read. And then you're in it. And once you get in it like that, then you start thinking historically, you start thinking critically about your own work. And then you start thinking strategically about how to get what you want out of the experience and out of the making and how to position your work and put it in a place where it can get to the place where you're trying to be. And if you're trying to be in a museum, there's an approach that will be more likely to get you there than not. And my thing was always that if you can't name the people specifically who are going to celebrate your work, acclaim your work critically, who are going to buy your work, if you don't know them already, you can't name them as a group, then that means you can't count on somebody out there that you don't know doing things that would be in your best interest. You just can't. You can't unless you already know them. And if you don't know them, then you got to take responsibility for that yourself. And so that piece of advice, check your stuff. It might be like a whole lot of other stuff. That was really good advice. And so the most irritating thing well, you know what? I haven't cataloged a lot of irritating things that people have had to say about what I do. But what is irritating is when people completely misidentify things that are apparent in the thing right in front of them. That's irritating because then they're not looking. And not seeing is more irritating than anything. Because if it's right there on the surface and all you had to do is just describe it and you can't even describe that, then that's irritating.
And it happens with remarkable frequency
and
and criticism, actually. I'm shocked by that.
It does happen.
Certainly, I think in my experience of interviewing artists that absorbing criticism is a kind of being able to positively absorb criticism is a characteristic of a great artist, actually. You know, so thank God you started young, and now you're one of the world's great masters.
See, don't
You know,
don't believe any of it.
And
You see what I'm saying?
you know, associated with figuration, but with a remarkable ability to do abstraction. You know, the Rorschachts at the end of the show are kind of, you know, so there. To the abstract painters in America, just to know, you know, just so you know that Kerry can do it better. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about the way you work is that you paint from life and you paint from three-dimensional figures. When you're doing a self-portrait, you use a mirror. You do not, as a rule, work from photography. And probably the vast majority of painters today are working through photography, and it gives a different plasticity to your characters, a different sense of movement. Sometimes they're very flat, but they're also corpulent and living at the same time. So, you know, is photography killing painting?
No. I mean,
And
so
how easy is it for you to turn your back on photography?
well, I don't turn my back on anything. I mean, so here, what is it? It's 2016. It's the year 2016. I was born in 1955. By 1955, almost every option that is available to an artist to make a work was already codified and already on the table. That was already, so before I even got to kindergarten, there wasn't anything you couldn't do if you wanted to make a work of art. Photography, you know, and if you follow David Hockney, I know people who've seen the book Secret Knowledge, you know, David Hockney, well, they were using photography in the 16th century to make artworks. So but the thing is, the question is not whether the thing is figurative, it's not whether it's abstract, it's not whether it's conceptual, because all those things can be bad. You know, it's like the nature of the thing is not what makes it good or whether it makes it bad. I mean, the relative value of the thing has everything to do with how it engages in the conversation about the character of those kinds of things. And so I don't want photography in my painting now. So when I use photography, I'm using it because I want to say something about photography. Or if I'm doing work that's installation-based, I'm doing it because I want to say something also about what it means to make installation. Or if I want to do something that has a conceptual frame, I want to do something that's about language or that's about conceptual. It's about those things because I got to choose from those things because by the time I graduated from high school in 1973, all of that stuff was already available. And so as artists now, we are simply making selections from options that are already on the table. There's a menu you can choose from. And my position is that you need to be able to work all those positions from the inside out, not from some superficial position where you're trying to do it because it's what everybody else is doing and you just want to fit in. You know, your classmates are doing it. So when I was teaching at UIC, and it's not just UIC, it's every single school I've ever gone to do visiting artists, crits and lectures and stuff like that. I mean, the phenomena. So there's already this perception that painting is somehow a retrogressive or obsolete kind of modality, but conceptual art is also retrogressive. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that stuff is as academic as Bouguereau was in 18th century France. It's the academy. And the stuff that circulates in the academy becomes a part of a series of patterns. And everybody who goes through the academy either adopts those patterns or they fail. You know, and so it's all the same. It's all on a spectrum as far as I'm concerned. And so when you select one of those things, it has to be because you found more utility in that particular thing for the thing you're trying to do at a given moment, But you don't have to be beholden to any of those strategies. They are all available to use whenever they are needed, not because they're being imposed because there's some sort of, they are all conventions that are either imposed as a kind of pattern of sort of cultural acceptability or critical acceptability. And so, I don't know, where was that going? Because that's...
Can I? That was great, and let's take a different tack. There are so many things to comment about in your work and to ask you about. We'd have to be here for days. But one thing I am particularly drawn to is your astonishing and mesmerizing depictions of women and loving couples. And there's a lot of intimacy and tenderness in your work. And I'm wondering, what is the role of love in your work? And, what is your depiction of love? What does it say about the purpose of art?
Oh, well, so here, the art has one fundamental purpose. It's to show people things they wouldn't see if you didn't put it in front of them. That's really all it does. That's what it does. And so in my own work, a part of what I'm engaged in is really showing things that you don't generally have a chance to look at. And one of the things you see least often are expressions of love between two black figures in almost anything. In almost any way you think about the ways in which love is expressed between black people is fraught with some sort of tragic or traumatic or abject sort of quality. It brings to mind, so there was this, how many people saw Brother from Another Planet? So there's one scene in that movie that it's like, when I saw it, I say, oh, my God. It's like, what the? So there's one when the Joe Morton character, who is the alien, sort of is down to earth, and he's going around, he goes to this bar, and he meets this woman, and she takes him home, and they end up in the bed, and they're having sex, and she has that line, and she says, "My man, boy, you got to cut those toenails." But if you remember that, so so what was interesting about that to me? So they get that far, and she doesn't know he's got alien feet, like these great big giant alien feet with two toes and a great big toenail. It's like that's how little awareness she had of him, because he was completely sort of a blank. But it's like, but that said something to me. It said something about a kind of desperation that allows you to overlook meaningful details that could leave you vulnerable to some crisis that you may somehow not be able to extricate yourself from at some future moment. That the kind of attention that we pay to things, it just needed to be, I don't know, I just needed to, that hit me, and I never forgot that. And that moment in the film is probably, for me, is the pivotal moment in the whole film. But there's also a moment in Charles Burnett's film, Killer of Sheep, for people who haven't seen that. If you see that film, that's probably the most poignant moment in the entire movie is when the man who works at the slaughterhouse is dancing with his wife in the living room, and it's playing to Dinah Washington singing "This Bitter Earth." In that moment, it is one of the most beautiful moments in cinematic history. But it is also one of the most painful because there's a certain kind of alienation between those two that is really palpable on the screen. And so between those two things, you're trying to figure out a way to resolve something about this alienation, but also to resolve something about this inattention. It's like this inability to pay attention to details that really matter. Those two things really mattered to me. And so when I'm making images of my figures, well, those things, I mean, I pay attention to everything because every part of that matters. You know, and the thing is, I'm married to a woman, and so, and she will tell me every time when I'm working on things how important it is for the character of those figures to be on. You know, it's got to be on, because when you put a thing out in the world, I mean that thing. I mean, once you put it out, it's loose, you know. And if you haven't attended to some aspects of it that can ricochet back on you in ways that you don't want it to, you know, then you could have a thing that's out of control that starts to function in ways that you don't really mean for it to. And as I was saying earlier, I'm interested in. I mean, I'm applying everything I know and everything I feel and a lot of things I believe to the things that I make. And so I expect everybody who encounters the work to bring that same level of attention to the things that I made. You know, that's what this is. It's me and you now. That's what the whole point of it is, in a way. And so my wife, Cheryl, she's sensitive to it, and I'm sensitive to it. And so it depictions of love, because you just don't, I mean, here's the bottom line. Black people didn't come to the United States to love each other. We weren't brought here to love each other. We were actually brought here to despise each other, to create distance between us and each other, which is the way you maintain a system of power that keeps the people subjugated, is you have the people then start to operate at the level at which they police themselves, they check each other, they despise each other. That's how you make it work. And so we came here under those circumstances. So trying to find a way to be in love with each other was always difficult. So now that I put myself in a position where I can sort of introduce into the museum images of people, I want to introduce those images in a way that gives them back some of that capacity that was robbed from them, and puts them in a place where you have to think about them, even in the mundane levels at which some of those images operate, that they don't always have to be sensational. Their situation doesn't always have to be traumatic. It doesn't always have to be tragic. But it has to have a certain thing that looks like it's real. And so that's what that means for me when I'm trying to do
that is an
that work.
amazing answer.
So.
That is an amazing answer. So we're going to open it up to questions in 1 minute. I'm going to ask one last question. We're going to go from a sublime and beautiful response to the profane. We're at an art fair, and where dealers are hoping to do brisk business. Last May, a painting of yours from 1992 sold for $2.1 million at Christie's. Collector, no doubt, made a
I didn't
killing
get my
on
part,
that
though.
sale.
I didn't get my part.
No, that's the problem with the secondary market. It's fun. It's interesting. In Europe, artists will get a percentage of those sales.
Well, you also, in California.
That's true, in California as well.
has a resale royalty law. If they sell something in the secondary market in California, you get a percentage of the profits. But because all the business is happening in New York, it's just not going to happen. Not happening.
So tell me, how do you think, when you're working in the studio, when you're making a painting, how do you think about the art market?
I'm going to give you two answers. So I think about the art market like Tintoretto thought about the art market. So if you read some of the letters that Tintoretto and artists were writing to their client, Tintoretto said, you should pay me this much for this work because I used 36 grams of cobalt blue on that painting, and that cobalt blue is some expensive stuff. But that's how they talked about what they did. I mean, it's like because color was precious. I mean, it cost a lot. That's why they used so little of it. So, and I spent this much time, I put this much color, I used that particular color, and I know you like it. So, they give you all that.
Pay a premium for the gold leaf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I got to pay somebody to make that gold leaf and make that frame. Come on now. So if everybody in here is familiar with how the market kind of works, because you see those astronomical prices that artworks get sold for, like the Richter for $35 million, the Warhol for $77 million, for $80 million. It's like all those works going for that kind of money. So you could say on some of that's obscene. But you're declaring that obscene has no effect on whether markets like that continue and whether they grow and whether they kind of get out of control. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, so I look at that. If you look at the value of works by black artists, African American artists, and you could say this about Chinese artists, you could say this about artists from India. You can say this about a lot of artists for a long time, that the discrepancy between the prices paid for that work and the prices paid for stuff like Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg, stuff like that, is the vast gap. There's a huge discrepancy between the way those prices are achieved. But getting those prices actually has, my thing is, if there's a market like that you can participate in, do it. Because so money is just a tool. It's a resource that allows you to do things you want to do, live the life you want to live, and give benefit to people that you would be unable to give benefit to if you didn't have those resources. And so it makes no sense to always stay outside the market when the market crosses a certain threshold. If you are always outside that market, then you will never achieve the kind of liberty, I'll say. Because there's a certain kind of liberty that goes with having reached a certain kind of market standing.
And power.
Well, and power.
I mean, the market is a media platform. How often do artists get outside the arts pages, and one way they die, another is they achieve a high price at auction. And so in terms of gathering an audience for your work, the market can
the auction is
bring greater footfall to.
But the auction is unique. The auction houses are unique. Now, they do have an impact on what happens in the galleries. So, this is a part of, but it's consistent with the way in which capitalism as a system is always going forward and up as a kind of strategy. It's as a kind of, it's a process. And so in capitalism, if you sell something for less than somebody else paid for it, that destroys markets. Because what it destroys is confidence. And the confidence in the market is the belief that somebody else will always be willing to pay you more for the thing than you paid for it yourself. That's what confidence is. And it's also confidence that every time a product by a certain company comes on the market, it'll be consistently of a consistent quality with all the other things that had already been on the market before. That's what confidence is. When products lose confidence, when people lose confidence in products, either those companies go out of business, and those products leave the marketplace, and then things are no longer available to people who might either need them or want them. And so it's just the market is just a mechanism. I mean, we all need it. I have a studio. If you have a studio that's separate from where you live, the cost of maintaining that studio can be really high. If you have, all those people who have assistants working for them in their studio, you got to pay those people. And if you want to pay them a fair living wage, that means you got to keep making more. You got to keep making enough money to keep paying those people and paying those bills and paying those rents and buying that material and doing things. So I made an artwork that sort of spoke to this issue of the market and market accessibility. So I did a piece it's a sculpture piece that's called the 99-cent piece. And it's titled 99 cents because that's the threshold of cheapness. And so I made the piece is just, so I saw it as taking Jeff Koons, the logic of Warhol and Koons one step further. Instead of converting common objects into luxury objects that cost a lot, let's just do the money. Make the money the artwork. So I took 99 cents, 3/4, a dime, 2 nickels, and 4 pennies, had that made into a sculpture where the quarter is 5 feet in diameter, and they scatter out on the floor. So that 99 cents in change is the work itself. And so there was going to be a gilded version that I made that has a brass finish, a naturalistic version where the quarters are silver and the pennies are copper, and then there was going to be a version made out of marble. So all of the classic art world configurations. But the point of the whole thing was that, so the alternate title is 99 cents and change, also known as 99-cent piece, also known as $136,000 in change, because it costs $136,000 to make the thing. So that the image of the value that resides in the image of the thing and the cost of its production, and then what it can be sold for, those things are all out of alignment with each other. And that's where the idea of the thing sort of resides, in the misalignment of all those things. But the thing is, like, so you either have to have somebody, if you don't have that kind of money yourself, you can't make a thing like that. You either have to have somebody sponsor it, which is what a lot of the galleries do. They sponsor artwork, so they pay for it ahead of time, and then they try to sell it to somebody after it's made. You either have to have that, or you have to have the skills yourself and then spend the time to make it yourself. And that can be really difficult to do. And so, it's like this, making artwork is not, I mean, you can do it as a cottage industry, you know, where you stay in your bedroom or you do it on the kitchen table. You could do that. You could do that. Or you could get in the mix where a lot of the challenges are and a lot of the energy is, and you can try to go toe-to-toe with people who are trying to operate at the top of the game. And for me, it's more interesting to be at the top, to try to operate at the top of the game. It's like, if you never give yourself a chance to get in the mix like that, then you'll never know whether your stuff could have been worthwhile or not. And I think you gotta find out. You gotta know for sure. And the only way you can know for sure is to be in it. And if it requires, and the gallery system and the museum system, that's the arena that will put you in a place where you can do those kinds of things. That's just how it is. That's how it is. And I'm not afraid of the market. Now, it's precarious, because speculation has no relationship to the real value of the works you've made at all. But you can't stop people from spending their money foolishly any more than you can guarantee that people will always spend their money wisely. You just can't. All right.
That was comprehensive and excellent. So do we have a question right in the front? We have one over here.
Oh, thank you so much for this master class. It's been absolutely mind-blowing. But okay, I've got a really specific question about a work from the show, the 7 a.m. Sunday. You're talking about too much praise, but I just feel like I gotta say it. I think that's the most exciting painting moment of the 21st century. There's something going on there it's everything. It's ambiguous, it's transcendental. It's hard to describe, but it's several things at once that's going on at once. And I know that you say you don't want to talk. Artists don't want to talk too specifically about things. Maybe if you could talk about sort of the mood, what it was like, how you came to be in that place to create that work. Oh, sorry. And could you describe the work too?
Oh, well, I don't have any problem talking specifically about anything. Because I'm not trying to confuse anybody about anything. So why did I make that work? So I've been on the south side of Chicago ever since I've been in Chicago. So I'm a 30-year South Sider. And we've been in Bronzeville for most of that time. And so a lot of the work I make is about the environment that I live in. I mean, it's about what happens around me. And that corner where that painting is set on the corner of 39th and Indiana Avenue, where my studio used to be in the middle of that block between 37th Street and 39th Street. And there's a church across the street from, on the east side of the street, the Apostolic Faith Church. And there was that church, and then there was vacant lot to the corner. And so what I did with that painting, so that 7 a.m. Sunday morning, with that lens flare on that, it was to create a space in which hallucinations can take place. That's what that was. So when you have a phenomena like that where the imagery is obscured because of some sort of physiological phenomena, like the light flashing off a piece of glass that kind of blinds you, then you have an opportunity to create hallucinations. And so that gave me an opportunity to imagine what could be built on those vacant lots in the space where the lens flare took place, against the way in which people sort of start circulating early on Sunday morning in the neighborhood, where there's just a handful of people on the street and one or two cars coming up and down, and then you can hear the music that's coming out of the apartments in the building a block away. That's really what that work is about. It's like, okay, now, I mean, that piece was sort of prophetic in a way, because if you go to that corner now, the church is actually building a massive structure right on that corner now. So it sort of fulfilled the thing that I laid out in the painting.
We had a question right about there, didn't we?
Thank you. As a public school teacher in Chicago, keeping it local, I'm asking you to speak to advice you could give to the mayor and Forrest Claypool as to fully funding Chicago Public Schools arts programs and libraries. Thank you.
Fill up the library with stuff. Fill it up with stuff and keep filling it up with stuff. So, as far as education, the thing is, so nobody has any idea what impact the things they say to a child is going to have on their life in the future. Nobody knows that. And so, then the responsibility to me of schools is to put everything in front of every kid. So I think the problem with school is that you end up sort of setting up these structures in which you select kids who seem to already have a propensity for certain kinds of things or a talent for certain kinds of things, and then you start giving them all the advantages. So the whole education system in the United States is inverted. So if you get to graduate school, so people who get to graduate school, most people who go to graduate school never pay a dime for tuition, because there are all kinds of grants and programs and stuff like that that offset the cost of tuition and everything else, and then give them work studies so they can earn a little bit of money while they're in school. So what we do is that we start people out in situations where they have very few resources, and then we weed them out right at the place where all of the resources start flooding in, which is on the back end. But the people that are starting out, you don't prepare them well enough so they can compete to get to the place where they can get access to those resources later. So my thing is that you should load in everything. Everything loads in at the front. Everything. And it's got to be done in such a way that you have to believe that you have to keep pumping unlimited amounts of energy and resources into those places at that time. By the time they get out of high school, they have to be, you've already should be preparing them so they can start to fend for themselves. So then they can go toe to toe. But it's all turned upside down now. So, and of course, everybody, maybe people know, I am on the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities as a part of their turnaround arts programming, where they work with schools that were low performing, low achieving, and where most of the kids who are in the schools qualify for breakfast programs and stuff like that. So, but what's
That's
my approach?
President Obama you're
President
talking about.
Obama. Sorry about that. In my perception, so the problem with even some of the turnaround programs, that they are also oriented towards kids who are already kind of self-selecting to be in certain kinds of things. But I think you have to develop projects and programs where every single child in a school gets to participate in that thing. Every single one. It doesn't matter what they're interested in, but what you have to do is you show them how participating in this thing as a part of the whole school transforms the school they're in. So I don't want 10 kids who are going to work on a mural project with me, or 6 kids who are going to learn a song, from somebody who's a musician, or a couple of kids who are going to learn how to do a little bit of acting, and then they put on a play for the rest of the school. You got to, if you do all those things, the kids have to be doing the sets, they have to be doing the lighting, they have to be doing the directing, they have to be doing all of those things, as well as the ones who want to act, because everybody doesn't want to act like everybody doesn't want to make paintings. So you got to figure out structures that allow everybody to participate. And this is what school is supposed to be for. Especially before you get to high school. It's supposed to be like that all the way through. I am only here because when I went to I moved from Birmingham to LA in 1960. That period between 1960 and 1968 seems like the golden age. So it was before people started to be afraid that black kids or minority kids were being tracked into the trade jobs because they taught industrial arts at the school. They taught metal shop, wood shop, plastic shop, electronics, all those things, auto body and fender repair. I took every one of them. And what I learned in there is something that can't be replaced, which is process. That everything that happens in the world happens because a process was set into motion. That a table is not just a table, it's raw material that was made into a table. And if you know the processes that get raw material from the ground to the processing plant to the table, then you know something about the way the world works. And when you know something about the way the world works, then you know what to do in the world. So if you take the Human Genome Project, what is the Human Genome Project about? Well, once they mapped the human genome, they found out what those sequences were, then they start figuring out what those sequences do, then they figured out what to do with those sequences. Well, I mean, that's pretty pragmatic. But the implications of that can't even be calculated yet. But I can guarantee you that people who don't know how those things work won't be participating in it. I can tell you that now. So that's my perception of what school is for. School is for teaching. School is for learning. And you It's gotta be the whole idea is that it's not for special kids. It's not for talented kids. It's for every kid, because there's a place in a school or in a project that every kid can participate and feel a sense of achievement in. Every single one. And I guarantee you, if you start out learning how to make a shoe shine box or a whatnot shelf, in the wood shop, if you don't know how to read before you start, at some point you will start learning how to read, because that will open up the access to more things that you want to make. That's how you do it. You don't have to do the reading up front. You can do the other thing up front. Bring in the reading comes in. I read books about physics, but I never took a class in physics. I read books about semiotics, but I never took a class in linguistics. There's nothing that stops you from doing any of those things because you know how to drive a nail in a piece of wood. What is that about?
Now,
anyway.
we are at time, but hold on. I'm going to make an executive decision to go over by 5 minutes, if that's okay with everybody. And we're going to take one last question right from there.
And Sarah, I did want to.
Straight ahead, over there.
Well, go
Yeah.
to the back.
Yeah.
The people up front got it.
And I'm going to say thank you right now for an unforgettable hour. And we're going to hear a final question.
And I did want to mention just before the question also that there will be a book signing with Sarah and Kerry James directly following this panel under the Center Plaza.
Where?
The
Where-
Center
yeah.
Plaza. We'll be walking there.
The Center Plaza, that's that big round. Yeah,
Yep.
Okay. There we go. Sorry.
Okay, hello. Thank you so much. I'm so touched by this talk. I wanted to ask you, you spoke about the museum and the institution, and you talked about, you kind of encouraged us to go into those places if we can do it, or if you feel like we're able. And I'm fascinated to know a person who's personal convictions are very important to me, right? So when we go into these spaces, or as you've gone into these spaces, what does it look like to preserve your personal convictions? Or are you what does it look like? Are you compromising in some ways when, I don't know, I'm interested in when you go into these spaces where there's power and there's influence and people have specific agendas, what does it look like to preserve what is important to you, to make the work that you believe in, but still be in these spaces?
Well, you know what? I mean, in my, so if you take all of the things I just said, that means then that you move through the world with a certain kind of self-confidence, meaning that you can know as much about the world as anybody else can know about the world. It's like there are no authorities out there who you should surrender the belief that they know more about it than you do. And so that means when you approach things, you don't approach things because you're with fear, out of fear, because you know you got something to say about it too. And when you go into a place that doesn't have something that you want, you can insist on it being there. But what's better is to assert the possibility of having a thing there by putting it there yourself. I mean, so if I go into a place, I mean, and these are certain kinds of places. No, I can't go into the Nike store and ask them to sell Adidas. No, that's just not. But if you go into a museum that they are built around this sort of this vast sort of variety of things that people have been able to make. If it seems deficient in one way or another when you go in there, then you can say, I mean to put the thing that's not there in there. You can say that. And so that's when I went to the museum, that's what I said. You know, I love it the way it is, but it's not good enough because I want to see something else there. Can I put it there? So I ask myself the question first before I ask somebody else. Because I think, this could be a character flaw on my part. But I have a total aversion to dependency. And I don't mean to be denied the things that I want because somebody else is unwilling to provide them for me. And if I am as intelligent as anybody else, if obstacles arise in front of me, then I have to work out a strategy for circumventing the obstacle. And you keep doing that, you keep doing it, you keep doing it, you keep doing it. There's no moment of surrender. And for me, this is the way it is from the moment you come into any kind of consciousness of yourself in the world as an agent to the time you can't do another thing because you're so enfeebled and old you can't move anymore. All your life is about is negotiating a series of obstacles that are in place when you arrive on the planet. And there's nothing that says that the world. If you look at, so you go to Egypt, you look at the pyramids are in ruins. You go to Greece, you look at the Parthenon is in ruins. You go to Rome, it's ruins. There are ruins of civilizations that were once great all over the place. So that tells you something about the processes by which human beings operate and organize themselves in the world. They are always replacing things that have become obsolete with something else. And maybe they're not even waiting for the thing to become obsolete. They're tearing it down before it even had a chance to get going good sometimes. So you can either stand around and wait for somebody to knock you out of the way, or you can throw some elbows too, And I'm about throwing some elbows,
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Kerry, for an inspiring talk. Thank you. You were amazing.